Before I begin, this story mentions domestic violence and alcoholism. So if you don't want to hear it, be sure to skip this story. This happened to me 2 years ago. A little context before starting the story is that at this time in my life, I had been married for almost a year with my husband Vic. Our marriage was anything but happy. At this point, he had been beating me for months now. We were both raging alcoholics, just living off our savings and living in a house that Vic's mom owned, so we didn't have to pay any rent. We just stayed home and drank all day and slept or whatever while we were all drunk off our butts. So since there was so much violence going on in the home, I would lock him out of the house a lot of the time. He would just kick them in. We only had the front and a side door. The side door recently got the frame fixed, so it's the only one that is actually locked. The front door was all messed up, so we used an anti-break-in door stick that goes under the handle for security, or a sense of it anyway. The story starts out on an early Sunday morning, around 11 a.m. Vic and I have been up all night from the night before, drinking and just being wild. We were sitting on the living room floor drinking beer. The TV was really loud playing music, when all of a sudden we heard someone knocking on the front door. We got scared, thinking it could be his mom looking for him or maybe the cops, because I don't really remember if we did anything crazy last night or anything. Then the knocking turns into someone trying to open the handle and push the door to try and open it. At this point, we're just like, okay, it has to be his mom. We texted her asking if it was her. She said that she was at work. Vic carefully looked through the curtains to see who it was. It was some random tall, tan and lanky middle-aged man with brown hair. The town we lived in is super small, and we were born and raised there. We know every single person in town and they know us. I immediately started freaking out, wondering who the hell that man was. I finally looked out the curtain to try and get a picture of him and to see him myself. I was so scared, but as soon as I looked out, he started walking down the porch steps. I told Vic to run and to make sure that he doesn't try to kick in the side door. The guy was nowhere in the front to be seen. I started going around all the windows on every side of the house searching for him. There's no way he got away that fast. I went towards the back of the house in the kitchen and looked out the window. I saw him walking through our backyard and across the alley. The worst part being that Vic's mom's house is across the alley. She wasn't home and she always leaves her garage door open, which leads to a sliding door to get into her home. I was totally freaking out because our son was over at her house with Vic's frail stepdad and teenage sister. We called her and we told her to tell Vic's stepdad to make sure to lock the door. She said that no one could see anyone suspicious, but that the garage was closed now. About 30 minutes passed. I couldn't relax. I was terrified. Why was that man trying to get into our house? My car was out in the driveway, so surely he must have assumed someone was home. Not to mention the loud TV you could probably hear from outside too. I told Vic I wanted to go for a drive to see if we could locate the man and call him into the police as a suspicious person. But I was just scared that he might be watching the house from somewhere, and what if he got in somehow if we left? We left Vic's phone on a FaceTime to call me in the living room to hear if any sounds were made while we were out. We drove around a couple of blocks, then we saw him. He was walking around trying people's door handles. I was terrified. I followed him down one street. He panicked once he saw that I watched him try at least 3 different houses. I was just so in shock. I was drunk and with my husband, who I'm not supposed to legally be with, and driving. I was really scared to call 911. Then the guy ran back to our street but was still a couple of blocks away from our house. I just followed behind him slowly to not lose him. We saw him go to some old man's house we know, since we walk by his house a lot. We know his adult son is usually there, but that day his truck wasn't in the driveway, just the old man's red Dodge Ram. The random man walked right into the old man's home after seeing it was unlocked and that we were still following him. My heart dropped. What if he did something to the old man? He could rob him, kill him, anything. I told Vic to go knock on the door to get the old man's attention. I parked a house away, and Vic ran up to the old man's door, immediately knocking frantically. I saw the random man and the old man come out of the house. They all stood outside on the porch talking for about 5 minutes. I saw the old man making a call, and the random man was too. I just watched nervously. After about 10 minutes, I saw the random guy just walking away from the house, allegedly still on his phone. As soon as he was a house away from where I was parked, Vic came to the car. I asked him what was going on and if the old man knew the random man. He said the old man was extremely confused as to why the random man was in his home. He had never seen him before either. Once Vic explained to him why he came to warn him of the guy entering his house, the old man was going to call the police. But the random man's excuse was that he's not from the area but was doing a job around here, and that he broke down in his company truck. So the reason he was going around trying to go into houses was because he was looking for his friend's house that he worked with, who said that his house would be open, but that he just didn't know which house it was. But of course, that just sounds extremely ridiculous and false. The old man then asked him what company he worked for so he could call them and tell them to get him. He gave some random company name. The old man started searching numbers online to call the company, and that's when the random man got on his phone and then walked away from the old man's house, allegedly calling his friend who he said could go to his house. I told Vic to go ask the old man if he would be fine now, and ask him if he wanted us to call 911 and if he would need any help with anything else. The old man thanked Vic for coming to warn him and that he would be calling the police and making sure that they found the guy. We just decided to go back home after that. I never got back with the old man for an update, and I never heard anything else about the strange random man being arrested on the local police Facebook. The last thing I heard was that Vic's mom saw someone that matched our description of him walking on the highway out of town. I'm really glad that he wasn't able to get into our house, and I'm glad that we warned the old man about him going into his house. I was scared for weeks after this incident, and I made Vic finally fix our front door, but I was always still scared that he would come back one day, since we were the ones that saw him. Back in 2019, I was talking to a guy that I had just met through an old job. Being around him was exciting, and I loved all of the adventures we would go on. What I didn't know is that he and his best friend were selling illegal substances from his best friend's house. I never heard of this occurring, nor did they ever do this around me. Fast forward to April 6, 2019. It's around 10:30 p.m. I was 18 years old at the time, and I'm a female. I was sitting upstairs in the game room with my now ex-boyfriend when two guys with blue bandanas around their faces walked inside holding handguns. They asked,
"Yo, where's the stuff?"
In return, my ex just laughed and asked, "What stuff?" There was an empty shotgun sitting beside one of the two men, and one of them turned around and grabbed it, hitting my ex square in the face. Afterwards, they forced us to go downstairs and lay on our stomachs. I had a guy on me with a knee on my back, and one right below my butt tapping the gun to my head the entire time as they searched the home. They took my phone along with other items throughout the house. They did leave for about 5 minutes before we heard the doors being busted down again and the windows breaking. They came back for round 2. We all fell back to the ground as one of the men stepped on my ex's face where he had been hit, stating that he was lucky he hadn't been shot. They then grabbed even more items and left again. I was able to find my car keys before they came back the second time and kept them with me for the second encounter. After they left, my ex and I ran to my car as quickly as possible and then left for the hospital. By the time we had left the home, we were both covered in blood, and as when laying on the ground, my ex was bleeding horribly from the shotgun wound to his face. I'll never forget that night. The feeling of somebody else having your life in their hands selfishly, being covered in someone else's blood, and how it felt sitting alone in the hospital waiting room as I was left to soak in the thoughts of what had just occurred. This happened back in 2017. I want to start off by saying that I'm very well off in my life, and I live in a very nice house and own lots of very expensive cars and other stuff. I used to be very active on social media, including YouTube, and I posted a lot of photos and videos of things, showing them off. I never really bragged about anything. I'm not a snob, but I did show off a lot of my very expensive cars. One thing any YouTuber can tell you is that you tend to attract lots of different types of people. Trolls, Karens, stalkers, and some people that have really bad intentions. I'll admit, at the time, I wasn't too careful about some of the things that I posted, and that's likely what caused this to happen. At the time this happened, I lived in an older single-story house surrounded by woods on two sides. Anyway, it was late one evening around 11 p.m., and I was sitting in my living room watching TV. All of a sudden, I heard a loud bang, and I looked over to see the wooden back door by the kitchen getting kicked in and literally falling off its hinges, and then 4 masked men with guns drawn walking over to me. I was frozen with fear.
"Give us all the keys to your cars,"
one of them demanded. I didn't need to be told twice. I walked with them to the bedroom where I kept my safe and unlocked it and gave them the keys, feeling utterly defenseless at the time. After I did, I felt a sharp pain on the back of my head. The next thing I remember was waking up and then seeing blood on my carpet. I looked at the clock and it was now 4 a.m. I picked up the phone on my end table and called 911. The sheriff and ambulance took about 35 minutes to arrive because I was so far away from them. While I was in the ambulance getting treated, I had made a report with the sheriff. Strangely, only 2 of my cars had been taken, and they weren't even the most expensive ones. It really made no sense at all. The sheriff said that they might come back some other time, so they would have a deputy watch my house while I was in the hospital. I ended up spending a full day in the hospital with a concussion. One of the men had hit me in the back of the head with their gun, it seems. Later that week, I had a whole new security system installed in my house and a security gate put at the end of my driveway. After that, I was a lot more careful about what I posted online. And a couple of years later, I pretty much stopped using social media completely for many other various reasons. I've also since moved from that house. So for any social media influencers out there, just be careful of what you post online. Things travel like wildfire, and you never know who's watching. Warning: the following story mentions assault, as well as the deaths of animals. If you don't want to hear dark content like that, please skip to the next one. I'm an 18-year-old man from Scotland, and the story happened just over a year ago in June of 2023. And it isn't the scariest story out there, but it's definitely given me PTSD that will never leave me. I'll have to explain a little bit of background for this to make sense. Apologies if the story's a bit long, but there's a lot of ins and outs. So here goes. At 16, I was kicked out of my house due to an altercation with my stepdad, so I lived in a homeless unit whom put me in a flat of my own in a rather dangerous area. My flat was filled with drug addicts and overall just really sketchy people. Anyways, after staying in the flat for a few months with my girlfriend, the police had come to our door asking for someone who we will call Frank for this story. He's still out walking the streets and could definitely still be a danger to me and my girlfriend. We told the police we didn't know who he was, and that was that. A few days later, we got a chap at our door again, and it was a man maybe about 20-ish. He told us he'd just moved in next door, and we were chatting away. I just so happened to say to him, "Oh, by the way, the police have been at my door looking for this Frank guy." And of course, he turned around and then said, "Yeah, that's me." My blood ran cold, but we just kind of laughed it off. A month or two goes by and we've spoken to him a few times. We can clearly see that he's not someone we want to be around, as he's had the police at his door. He's also had his door getting kicked in by people, and he always seemed to have really young girls in his house. We didn't know what extent this was until way after. Anyways, one day he invited us into his house since he could hear our music as we were getting drunk, and he told us he was doing the same and his ex-girlfriend was going to be coming up, so we should all go sit in his house. This is the point where we should have really listened to our gut feeling and not followed, but we were drunk, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. We went in and everything was fine. Then he told us the story about his ex-girlfriend had stabbed him and set his house on fire, killing his pets and stuff. So obviously at this point we were really uncomfortable, just thinking, oh God, who's this crazy lassie that's gonna walk in here who knows when? Then walks this tiny skinny little girl who looked like an actual child. I felt sick instantly. But that's a situation you can't exactly just up and leave, so we stayed for a bit, learning a bit more about her. It wasn't until she turned around to me and then said, "Aren't you my friend's big brother? I'm friends with her in school." And she actually said the name of my little sister. My heart sank instantly, as my little sister at the time was only 14, meaning this girl had to be around the same age, and this man was 20 if not older. We eventually asked what age she was, and she told us 15, to which he then interrupted and then said, "No, you're 16. And this is where it all started going downhill. He started seeming a bit off. He was getting more and more aggressive. At one point, he had pulled the little girl who we'll call Sophie out into the hallway, and then they were arguing, when all of a sudden we heard a couple of bangs and a thud. Then they both walked back in and Sophie was clearly shaken up. Then the next minute he had left us three in his flat and came back with random bits of furniture. Now, we didn't even question him on it, because he was at this point bright red with rage that was coming from nowhere, and just everything he was saying was so aggressive we didn't want to become the target of this. I forgot to mention that there was a dog in the house, and every so often Frank would turn around to us and then go, "You know, if I really wanted to, I could kill that dog." At this point, my girlfriend and I and even Sophie were just kind of looking at each other, and Sophie was on the verge of tears pleading with him to stop going and getting this furniture, which turned out to be from the flat downstairs he had kicked the door in. He also stole the dog and then furniture and was just bringing it to his house. I can't remember what he said, but he had snapped at my girlfriend, and she then stood up and said we were leaving because she wasn't taking this anymore. Sophie turned around and started crying, pleading with us to take her with us. So of course we did, as we weren't going to leave this little girl in the house with this crazy man acting like that. Boy, was this a butterfly effect on the next year. We all got up and tried to leave, when he then followed us up his hall and was grabbing Sophie, trying to get us to leave her, saying we were stealing his bird. Bird means girlfriend for all the non-Scots out there. During all this commotion, the dog had ran out of his house and ran into ours because he was terrified. So obviously I decided to keep the dog for the night, as it wasn't even his dog. Anyway, I'll cut that part short, as there's still so much more. But at the end of that night, we had to take Sophie home on a train, and he literally followed us right to our doorstep. We had to call the police and everything, as he literally wouldn't leave us alone. Then not even a week later, my girlfriend and I are getting drunk, because what else can you do when your life is that damn stressful? That's when we started hearing banging from outside. We look through the peephole, and there's drawers and TVs and things being flung about our landing. Then we look out our window, and there's the same crap being flung out the window into the car park. This goes on for about 20 minutes, and then it just goes silent. So we kind of just forget about it and just continue getting drunk. A little while later, we hear a door banging open and shut, and then crying and shouting. So we go look through the peephole again, and it's Sophie. She's bleeding from her legs. She's red everywhere, like early bruising. Her bra's halfway out her top, and she only has one shoe on. Then this big man appears who I've seen before, and I know that he stays down below us. He looked like he was on drugs. His pupils were like saucers, and his jaw was swinging. He had no shirt on and was at least in his late 20s. He was grabbing onto Sophie and trying to get her to go back with him. So we flung the door open, and as soon as she saw us, she ran over to my girlfriend and then grabbed onto her, hugging her and sobbing. When I looked at her, she looked at me, and she was mouthing help me to me. This man then told us that he was Frank's friend, and that he was looking after her because she had nowhere to stay, which clearly wasn't the case. So we kind of just went back and forward with him, saying that she was going to come home with us, and that was that. That's when Sophie then ran into my house and then collapsed right in my hallway, having a panic attack, which is when he tried to come into my house. Now, I weigh about 130 pounds and I'm only like 5'3". I'm not big in any way, shape, or form, and so I'm not really intimidating in the slightest, but I stood in front of him and pushed him back out of my doorway, to which he then responded, "All right, big man, calm down." Then he left. We gave Sophie some food to eat, and she told us what happened. 3 addicts from down the stairs had took her into the house. They took her phone and called her dad, saying they were her friend's dad and that she was staying there for the night. That's when they then locked her in the house, assaulted her multiple times, and wouldn't let her leave. She then ran when she got the chance, and then ran to our landing, hoping we'd hear her. And thank God we did, because in that flat block, no one ever helps anyone. Anyways, the police came and took her to the hospital, and that was that. Or so we thought. A few days go by, and me and my girlfriend are sitting in our house. We had just ordered some Chinese food, and my gut is telling me that we can't stay in that flat anymore. I felt sick to my stomach. Every noise set us off. We were an absolute mess. So we just waited on the food coming. And while doing that, we collected all of our expensive or meaningful belongings, which was the hardest thing ever because we thought we'd never get our stuff back. We took our 2 birds, called my Nana, and she came and got us. All because we had a horrible feeling in our gut. Fast forward the next day, and I'm at work when I get a no caller ID phone call. And as soon as I see it, I just knew it was the police. I answered and hysterically started asking them if my house had been broken into, to which they then replied with, "Would you be able to make your way home right now?" confirming my theory. I then called my Nana to pick me up from work, as I didn't drive at the time. Again, I was only 17 when this happened. We got to the flat and there were police officers in my house. The whole handle and lock from inside the door was lying in my hallway. There were bin bags that had been poured all over my first room and my hallway. My TVs were all smashed. Old phones were stolen. My girlfriend's jewelry box had been destroyed and things stolen from it. There were also knives and screwdrivers stabbed into the doors. One of the worst things, though, was a canvas of my girlfriend and 3 of her little brothers, one who sadly passed away when he was just a baby. Now, Frank knew this because we'd spoken about it that night, and only one of the babies had a load of stab holes through him. My whole house was destroyed. Everything we'd worked so hard to build together was just gone. Everything they could break, they broke. Obviously, we knew exactly who it had to be. It was Frank and his friends. Because 1, the canvas only Frank knew about, and 2, we had just saved Sophie from the other guys who ended up being arrested but let back out. So there you have it. One thing to take away from this story is always, and I mean always, trust your gut. This really worked out for us in the long run, as we now have a much nicer flat in a much nicer area near my family, and we're in so much of a better place. But sadly, we still see Frank around town, as he hangs out about within the same area as us. A constant reminder of exactly what happened and what our own stupid decisions caused. So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old, and I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go at my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there. We always did that because we were too young to stay home alone, according to my mom. We got up at 10:30 a.m., I took a shower, and then my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom just brushing our teeth and finishing up, when we heard someone knocking on our door. Since every time someone knocked on our door, they turned out to be a salesman or Jehovah's Witness, we kind of just waited for them to go away. After a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window, but no one was there. What a relief. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it really blurry. We waited and watched just in case it was a bird flying by. When a hand hit it clear as day, we got scared and we didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so he immediately called the police. While it was ringing, we had heard a loud bang at the door. Someone was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it or what, but it was one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, and so I did. It took 5 bangs until the perpetrator could finally bash open the door. Then the police answered. I remember the exact thing that my brother said. He was whispering. His voice could barely be heard.
Hello, there's someone in our house. I think they're stealing.
Then a pause.
We're at our house.
And he proceeded to give our address. Then another pause.
I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry.
While all that was being said, I was sitting against the wall hugging my knees. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up and down the stairs, opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. I don't know why. I then heard the sound my cell phone makes when it turns off, and I remembered that I left it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple of minutes when we heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod that we had laying around there. He started kicking the door.
Who the hell's in there?
The man screamed. We said nothing in return. Then he kicked again and again. I felt like I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache and I had chills and was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just way too much. After that, he stopped. We heard the door opening, and then silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess. Lots of papers and books all over the floor. The cabinets were wide open, cups and plates all over the floor as well. In our mother's bedroom, the nightstand and the closet were fully open, and everything inside of them was all over the place. Upstairs in our room, it was the same thing. In just about 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom, and she ordered us to go to my aunt's house ASAP, so we did. When we got there, I was a little more relaxed. My aunt was waiting for us with ice cream, probably because my mom told her everything that happened, and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 5 p.m. My mom told her boss that she had a home emergency, so she left work early. She tidied up the house, cleaned up, and left everything the way it was before so we could be relaxed. I really appreciated her and my aunt's efforts to calm us down and do everything they could so that we didn't have to think about it. According to my mom, the police got home after she arrived at 3 p.m., 4 hours after the incident. She explained everything that happened, but because of lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught, and honestly, I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next few days, my mom was home with us. I now tell the story as a funny anecdote. Luckily, no one was hurt, and he only took useless stuff. But at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old child, an experience like that can have serious repercussions. I'm really lucky that it never came to that, and that I got over it after a couple of weeks. I do want to mention a few more details before I end this. You may be wondering why it took 4 hours for the police to get there. My house is located on the far side of the city, but most importantly, the police in my country just suck. If you ask around, chances are plenty of people that have called the police had to wait for hours. Back then, news about how long it took for them to respond were common. In fact, one of the reasons for the 2019 Chilean protests was the dislike for the police labor. Fortunately, things are now getting better and trust for the police, while still fragile, is improving. So yeah, that's my story. I'm a 21-year-old female, and the story actually took me about 4 full days to type out. I got weird mini anxiety attacks when I tried. I'll be the first to admit that I've had a very, that can't happen to me, complex, and that's kind of what occurred in this story. I'm a university student, and I live in a rental house with 5 other people. It's far from ideal, but in this housing outcry that we're living in, it takes that sting off of us having to pay a bunch of money a month to exist in a box. This has relevance, I swear. I got extremely lucky last weekend when the 5 of the roommates I had were all out for the weekend. This has never happened, so I was really ecstatic to have the house to myself. I did the whole 21-year-old girl home alone stuff that you can think of. Watching movies with the volume loud, taking long-ass showers, walking around the house without a bra. You get the point. It was around 10 p.m. I had finished some homework and was relaxing with a glass of wine and watching some streaming services. It sounded briefly like there was something moving on the porch. We've had a fox in our yard before, and the thing used to make a lot of noise on our porch, so I assumed that to be the case. After hearing some fumbling the second time, I went over to check through the window. There was nothing there. As I'm turning to head back to the living room, a piece of cement flies through our kitchen window. I didn't know it was cement at the time, but that's not important. I think I paid myself a little bit when it happened, but I definitely screamed like a little girl. My moronic ass started unlocking the door to go outside, but common sense seized control of me again, and I locked the door back immediately. I also ran to the back door just to make sure it was still locked, even though it's glass and wouldn't even make a difference. Oddly enough, at this time my grandma's words came right into my head about something her own mother had told her. If someone tries breaking into your house, turn the lights off. You know the inside of your house better than they do. I shut the lights off in the living room and managed to turn the TV off, which was hard because my hands were shaking. My dad used to give me and my siblings advice on protection measures, which were not resonating at this time. I secured myself in my upstairs bedroom, roast me if you want, and I turned all the lights out in the house as I passed them. While walking up the stairs, I could hear the doorknob shaking furiously from the front door. I don't know if there was more than one person or if they realized they couldn't jump the fence to get into the backyard. While calling for emergency services on speaker, I secured my hunting knife to the end of my hockey stick with hot pink duct tape. I know, that's probably one of the most Canadian things I could say. If I was going to have to use it, at least I would look fabulous. I stayed in the dark holding my makeshift spear for what was probably about 15 minutes. I'm really glad that I wasn't being murdered in that amount of time. The operator then told me that the police were coming, which they eventually did. They took a very unsettling amount of time. The only reason I left the bedroom in the first place was because I heard knocking on the door downstairs and the police lights were flashing through the window. Otherwise, someone would have had to come in and physically pull me out of that room. A statement was given, but that's all they did. Literally all they did. Nothing else. Literally just that. A very nice female officer stayed with me in the house and helped me clean up the glass until my brother showed up to bring me to his place for the rest of the weekend, which I was very grateful for. So shout out to the officer cutie with the tattoos. I made an appointment with the doctor to get out on anxiety medicine, as well as medicine for nightmares. I know that I wasn't in any physical danger, but I've had some very charming dreams about similar scenarios, and I was just finding it easier to stay awake. Maybe that's juvenile of me, but I'm human. Meds are working fine, and I'm back at my house with wall-to-wall people again. And honestly, I don't hate that so much anymore. This was during the summer of 2018. I don't remember what day it was, but I remember that it was late June. School had just ended and I was elated to hang out with friends and relax after a tough year of grade 11. I liked being home just like any kid that goes to school, but especially because I was failing. My family and I lived in this very small town. I spent my whole life there, and although I liked how quiet it was, I was pretty far from my friends. A very lonely town. Mostly all of the residents were old, so you'd barely see anyone on the streets. Maybe the odd kid once in a while, but it was pretty desolate. My oldest brother had a pretty crazy girlfriend in our town. She was our neighbor's granddaughter. She pulled the usual manipulation tactics, and luckily my brother didn't fall for it and broke up with her. But as you could imagine, that wasn't the end of her. She and her friends ended up egging our house to hell. I'm talking about dozens of eggs, which took my dad forever to clean up. A few weeks later, she left back to her own town, so we never got the chance to confront her. My mom was pretty shaken at this, so we decided to install cameras and light motion sensors around our house. Now, my town had the odd weirdo. This one older guy that's now dead used to stalk my mom whenever she was working out from our backyard fence. She would catch him peering into the windows, and she noticed that he would go for walks every time she would work out, so she stopped. Anyway, it was June, and my brother had just gotten accepted into a college, and he was planning to play for the team. So for about 6 days, my mom, dad, and brother went out to help him get situated with the college. So now it was just me and my 18-year-old brother all alone in our house. The reason my mom was so okay with this was because something like our house getting egged hadn't happened in a long time. My biggest fear actually is home robberies. It's just really scary for a place you feel so safe in can change in such an instant. It was about 4 more days until my mom and dad were back home, and everything was going fine, until it wasn't. It was about 1 to 2 a.m. I don't remember exactly, and I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching a movie on my laptop, being the nocturnal child that I was. The blinds were shut, so I couldn't see outside, until I noticed a white light barely beaming through the blinds, and it was moving. I was confused at first, so I naturally went to see what it was through my kitchen window. My heart stopped when I saw 2 unidentifiable silhouettes of people with a flashlight behind my house shining it on the windows. I naturally went and woke up my brother and told him what was happening. He brushed me off, saying it was probably just some people taking a nighttime walk. I believed him, thinking it could be reasonable, but it just felt off. They were pointing it at our house and not any other house. I went back upstairs and they were gone. I deeply sighed and felt relieved, although now there was no way I was going to sleep now. I sat there for about half an hour trying to sleep, when our camera service gave me a notification on my phone saying it caught motion in our front yard. I was trembling with fear as I slowly checked the footage. I just kept saying to myself, it was just a car. And I was right, but I really wish I wasn't. I watched the footage as a white Ford slowly drove past the front of our house, and when I mean slowly, I mean like turtle slow until they eventually passed. There's no way they're driving that slow for no reason, I thought. So again, I went and showed my brother the footage, who was now annoyed that I woke him up for the second time. But this time he actually looked unnerved by this footage, and he gave me a terrified look. How many times have they passed our house? He asked with a shakiness to his voice. They only passed by just once, or that I know of, I told him. My brother got up and locked all the doors, something we don't have to do at night here because of how safe our town was. Another 20 minutes had passed and me and my brother were watching the windows. He was watching the backyard while I was watching the front. Then, of course, the Ford passed the front of our house again slowly until it stopped dead center at the front of our house. Then it hit me. They don't think anyone's home, I said to my brother. That's what it had to be. None of our cars were there because my mom didn't trust me and my brother going somewhere while they weren't home. My brother came running over, and that's when it happened. 3 men came out of the parked truck slowly approaching the house. Then I realized what was happening when one had a pistol. My brother pushed me away from the door in a panic. Holy crap, we're being robbed, he yelled. It made it even more scary because I could hear the panicked fear in his voice. My brother Someone who wasn't really terrified of anything looked that scared, and it petrified me. I ran back into the living room where I could hear our back doorknob being rustled vigorously. My brother grabbed a kitchen knife and ushered me and him under the kitchen table. It went quiet, a deafening quiet. The silence was loud, and all you could hear was me and my brother's short, panicked breath. The front steps leading up to our door began to creak under the weight of footsteps. It was so quiet that I could hear it. The silence was broken when a brick came flying through our front door window. I was overwhelmed with fear, wanting to scream. I bit down on my tongue so hard that it started bleeding. My heart was in my throat. They were in, I thought. We had wooden floors, so the floor would creak whenever someone would step on it. I glanced at my brother, who had put a finger up to his mouth, telling me to be quiet. Tears were now streaming down my face. What if they find us? A deep voice then lurched out.
All good. No one's here.
The light for the kitchen flicked on as I saw a man's feet from under the table. The deck, my brother whispered. He was right. Our kitchen table was right next to the door of our deck. 2 more men came bustling up the stairs.
We gotta move fast. Check the whole house and get back out to the truck as soon as possible. Don't take too long.
One man said to the other. One of the men went back downstairs while the other 2 stayed upstairs. I could hear trash bags being unfolded. My brother waited until they were out of the kitchen when he started quietly unlatching the deck door. It's unlocked, he said. Move fast. I nodded. He quickly unlocked the door and ran out. I followed. Without hesitation, he leaped off the deck out of the 2-story house. I hesitated until I then heard,
What the hell?
being yelled out. I jumped. On my landing, my ankle kind of twisted funny. There was so much adrenaline that it didn't even hurt until later. My brother and I ran blindly through the dark until we got to a well-lit street, and then we hid in some construction outhouses until morning. It was about an hour into the night when my ankle got a really sharp and persistent pain. I actually ran on a broken ankle. It was the most painful night of my life, but I had somehow managed to get some sleep. It was about 7 a.m. when my brother woke me up telling me they were gone. He helped me get back to the house when we called the police. It would take a while for them to get there because we lived in such a remote town. A lot of things were missing. My phone, my laptop, all my mom's jewelry, and all old valuables that she had in a china cabinet. My brother's wallet was missing, but mine wasn't. Eventually, 2 police officers showed up to tell us that there was nothing they could do except drive me to the hospital. It didn't even make the news. Go figure. This happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I had heard a knock at the back door. This confused me as no one ever used that door. My husband and I lived in a 4-plex at the time, and all of the units had a back door at the top of a narrow staircase. These doors were a little inconvenient to access, as you'd have to go around the building and up to the narrow stairs as opposed to the wider main entrance at the front. It didn't make sense to use the back entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who would go to that door to visit. As I approached the back door, I saw 2 tall men in the window standing at the door. A chill went down my spine. I didn't feel safe opening the door, so I called out, "Hello?" One of the men tapped on the window.
Yes, hello. May we come in? We're with Bresnan.
At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable, but we didn't have any issues with it. I replied, we're not having any issues with Bresnan. Is there a problem?"
Ma'am,
The man said.
can we come in? We're servicing the area, and it's really important that we look at your cable.
I shook my head. We're not having any issues," I repeated. "So yeah, there's no need to stop by."
Ma'am, we're visiting every resident in the area. Let us in so we can do our job.
The man said. I noticed the man grab the doorknob to try and open the locked door. I slowly grabbed a knife from our knife block and held it at my chest. We're not having any issues, I repeated, trying not to convey the shakiness of my voice. So you don't need to be here. The two figures appeared to shuffle and then straighten.
Ma'am, let us in. We're on a deadline and we need to do our job,
the man once again said. I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive home from work. I gripped the knife tighter.
Ma'am?
I saw him try the doorknob again. I closed my eyes and felt overwhelming gratitude for always locking my doors. Just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Could I please get your names and badge numbers? I can give your supervisor a call to let them know our cable is fine. I heard another shuffle, and then one of the men replied,
No need to, ma'am. We're sorry we wasted your time.
With that, both of the men exited the staircase and then disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held the knife tightly and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company or the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone. With the knife still grasped in my chest and the phone falling out of my other hand, I sank to the floor and cried. When my husband returned home, I told him what had happened. I was still very shaken up and had started crying again after he came home. He immediately called the Bresnan Cable Company and spoke to a representative, who then informed us that no one from their company was out on assignment in our area. The next day, we asked our neighbors if they had a visit from the company. No one had. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always